Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down something that's, well, it's pretty complex and definitely fiercely debated. And it sits right at the heart of Japan's economy. We're talking about the consumption tax rebate system. Now, I know, that sounds super technical, but trust me, it has massive consequences. This whole thing really pits economic competitiveness right up against social fairness. So let's just jump right in with the big question that really gets this whole debate started. Who is this system really for? Is it just a neutral, fair tax roll that helps everyone? Or is it kind of a hidden subsidy for the most powerful players? We're going to look at both sides of that coin. All right, first things first, we've got to get our heads around the system at the center of all this. And yeah, it might sound a little complicated, but the main idea, it's actually pretty simple when you break it down. Okay, so at the core of all this is something called the input tax credit. Now, the whole point of this is to stop what's called double taxation. Think about it like this. A company pays consumption tax on all the stuff it buys, its supplies. But they get to subtract that amount from the tax they collect when they sell their own product. This makes sure that the tax is only paid on the value that's added at each step of the way, not over and over again. Okay, but here's where things get really interesting, especially for exporters. For companies that sell their products overseas, this whole system basically works in reverse. You see, they don't collect any Japanese consumption tax on their sales abroad. But, and this is the key part, they did pay that tax on all the supplies they bought in Japan. So what happens? Well, the government actually gives them a cash refund for all that tax they paid. And we're not talking small change here. These refunds can be absolutely massive. And that right there is the core conflict. On one side, you have people arguing that this refund is absolutely essential. Without it, they say, Japanese companies just can't compete on the world stage. But on the other side, critics look at this and see a huge flaw, one that they believe creates deep, systemic unfairness.
Okay, so let's dig into that. We're going to start with the case for the system. Let's look at the strongest arguments for keeping things just the way they are.
The whole argument in favor of this rebate really comes down to one core idea: tax neutrality. And what does that mean? Well, it's the idea that the tax system itself shouldn't be messing with business decisions. It shouldn't penalize a company just because of where it sits in the supply chain. So supporters say, look, without this refund, taxes would just keep piling up and piling up at every single stage of production. They call this tax accumulation, and it would make Japanese products way more expensive overseas. It would basically cripple the country's ability to compete on a global scale. And they're quick to point out, hey, this isn't some weird special Japanese rule. This is a standard feature in pretty much every country that has this kind of tax. And when we talk about the scale of this, wow, it's staggering. We are talking about 3 to 4 trillion yen. That's how much money flows back to these exporting companies every single year. And from their perspective, this isn't just a simple tax refund. No, they see it as a vital cash injection that keeps factories in Japan running and ultimately protects Japanese jobs.
But of course, that's only one side of the story. Now let's flip the coin and dig into the powerful arguments against keeping this system the way it is.
For critics, this whole thing has morphed from being just a technical tax adjustment into something else entirely, a huge source of profit, especially for massive corporations. They argue it's not really about neutrality anymore. For them, it's all about a system that creates deep and fundamental unfairness. And they point to what they see as a really obvious contradiction. You see, everyone in Japan is told that the consumption tax they pay on pretty much everything goes directly to funding Social Security, for things like pensions and healthcare. But then, at the very same time, trillions of those yen are being handed right back to big corporations. And that, they say, is a massive double standard. For the critics, this isn't just about the money. It goes much deeper. It's about fundamentally eroding public trust. I mean, think about it. When regular people see a system that looks like it's bending over backwards to help huge companies, all while they're paying tax on everyday essentials, it really damages their faith in the entire tax system. All right, so where do these two arguments really clash? Let's put their key points of disagreement right up against each other, head to head. So, the first big point of friction is this. Is Japan just following a required international standard here? Is their hand forced? Or is there maybe more to the story? And this is where you really have to pay attention to the details. The pro-rebate side is right when they say the basic idea is a global standard. But opponents fire back saying, yeah, but not like this. They argued Japan's version of the rule is way too lenient, that it's far more generous and lacks the strict oversight you see in places like the EU.
Okay, next up, the debate moves to another simple but crucial question. Who's actually benefiting from all this? Are the rewards spread out, or are they all flowing to the top?
Supporters will tell you this is a lifeline for all exporters, big and small. But opponents come right back with official data, and they say it shows a massive concentration of these benefits. Essentially, they're arguing that saying this is all for small businesses is just a smokescreen. The real purpose, they claim, is to prop up a structure that overwhelmingly helps the corporate giants.
And to really hammer their point home, critics love to use concrete examples. And they don't get much more concrete than this. We're talking about a single corporate giant getting a rebate of around 350 billion yen. This single number is what crystallizes their entire argument, that the system isn't about tax neutrality anymore, it's about a massive transfer of wealth.
So, all of this brings us to the fundamental question at the heart of the whole debate. And really, it's a classic battle of priorities.
So at the end of the day, it all comes down to what you see on this table. And it forces a really tough question. What does society value more? Is this system an absolutely essential tool for the economy? You know, a pillar for global competitiveness whose unfortunate side effects we just have to live with? Or is it a fundamentally unfair setup that completely distorts the whole point of a consumption tax and is screaming out for reform?
So, now that you've heard both sides of the argument, the verdict is really yours. What takes priority here? Is it economic competitiveness above all else, or is it a broader sense of social fairness and trust? And that's the question we'll leave you with, because it really captures the entire conflict. Is this a pillar of the economy, or is it a distortion of society? Because what's at stake here is, well, it's a lot.